Thank you. Yeah, Sam mentioned that the Future Farm Resilience Fund is part of the package of measures that DEFRA are funding to support farmers. And basically how it works is there's a range of companies and advisory bodies and organisations that are delivering advice through this fund. ADAS are one of those organisations, and each company or organisation has sort of developed their own way that they think that this fund could be the most helpful to farm businesses. And we were involved in the pilot programme. I was delivering some of that advice, and now it's gone a little bit wider and nationwide. So any farm business, if you want to go on to the next slide, please. Any farm business that has an SBI number is eligible to claim support through the Farm Resilience Fund, Future Farm Resilience Fund. And the aim of it is to really help them to think about how the transition and how the change away from BPS and towards all these other schemes that Sam's been outlining can work for them and their business. The way that ADAS is, the advice that ADAS is offering for free to farmers funded by DEFRA through this fund is in three different ways, three different options, and farm businesses can either have one of these options or they can access all three. So we've basically initially got some transition webinars, which is about raising awareness amongst businesses. If you can go back to the one before, yeah, awareness, which I'll talk about one that we've got coming up in a second. Secondly, we've got free tailored one-to-one farm business reviews. That's very business specific, very tailored to their own situation. So that is really the most popular part of what we're doing at the moment. But and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And skills development workshops, which quite often end up being a follow-on from needs that are identified as part of those farm business reviews. So yeah, next slide, please. So next week we've got we've been doing some awareness events with individual groups that are already set up, but this the one that we're running next Tuesday evening is accessible by anybody that wants to access it, including advisors if they want more information about the detail, a little bit more detail about what Sam was just talking about with the new schemes. It's 7 o'clock next Tuesday, and we've got James Dunn, who's our Technical Director of Business Management, speaking, Richard, who's on this call from the NFU, and also James Evans, who's a farmer in Shropshire. So you can register for that on the information's there, and you can look back at the recording if you need that email address or phone number. So next slide, please. The most popular part of the fund that ADAS are operating is actually the specific farm business reviews. This is very much sort of free business advice for farmers, and it doesn't matter if they've got a consultant on the farm already. It can be they can still access this through ADAS. Financial analysis of their own business. There's some benchmarking involved with the using the farm business survey data, so they can see how they're performing against other comparable businesses. Discuss mitigation strategies with the change in BPS, help them to do some risk assessment and strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats analysis, and bespoke report provided for them, and a prioritised action plan. Next slide, please. And finally, sometimes through the advice to the farm, we might find they need actually some skills help. And there's the funding through the Farm Resilience Fund to give that to them. And most commonly we find that's to do with doing their own business planning, or possibly using sort of a cloud accounting software to help improve the efficiency of their business. And they're planned for December and January, when we've sort of completed some of the resilience work. Next slide. I think that's it. Yeah, so just the email address and the phone number is a central booking. And just awareness is the biggest thing, that farmers need to know this advice is around and it's specific to their businesses, not just general.
Thanks, Jill. So hello everybody. So as Ginny has introduced, we are one of the deliverers alongside ADAS and 17 other organisations who are delivering some support to farmers around England. So just to introduce our projects, so we're working in partnership with a number of organisations. We were also one of the deliverers on the pilot, and our current offering is very much built on what we learned from the pilot phase that was delivered last year. So we're working with the Anderson's organisations, so Anderson Centre and then the other 3 regional offices, providing expert business advice. But we're also working with some local delivery partners as well. So relevant to today is Sarah Starkey, I think, who's on the call today. So she's working with the Herefordshire Winn-Hub, but she works in Worcestershire and Herefordshire, supporting local delivery, supporting local communities. We're also working then with Fraser Hugel up in Yorkshire and Cambridge Eco, so Mary D'Ambrio over in Cambridgeshire. And the reason we're working with these organisations is they link to our pilot project and are providing local support, local partnerships, so that there is an element of kind of support where our partners are working, particularly with those people who've been involved with our pilot, to help implement plans and to help farmers to develop their thinking around how they make their business more resilient. The other organisation we're working with is the Farming Community Network, who are very much supporting on the sort of the stress and the well-being side of the project, making sure that things like stress and family relationships or other barriers aren't getting in the way of people taking action. So in terms of what we're doing for this pilot phase or this project phase, we have 170 one-to-one, very detailed farm business reviews available. They're working with an expert advisor from Anderson's to develop a specific resilience plan, looking at the farm performance, looking at opportunities, threats, and developing a targeted action plan with ideas about what could be done to change the business structure, the business systems, in order to make the business as resilient as possible for any future changes that are coming up under not just the agricultural transition, but things like stresses on the business that are caused by things like staff availability, workforce, impacts of things like flooding and droughts. So very much looking at all the things that can influence the resilience of a business. Currently, we've got about 30% of the places still remaining. If you're interested to find out more, please do have a look at our website. So the details are on the bottom of the slide, and we'll share those via Steve tomorrow or later today as well. But as I say, it's a very detailed intervention. As Julian said, that's the most popular at the minute and certainly has the highest impact in terms of getting some really high quality support and advice onto farm. They can be delivered remotely or in person, and will be delivered by an advisor that's kind of local to you as well. The next intervention we've got then, so similar to Gillian, we've got a number of different interventions that we're delivering in this round of funding. So the next one is some resilience planning webinars. These are focused on trying to give a bit of an understanding of what the impact of the agricultural transition might be, to introduce some of the tools and skills that you might need in order to start the journey around developing a transition plan, some of this sort of things you can look at in terms of budgeting, accounting, and they'll be led by Joe at the Anderson Centre. But we've also got Mark, excuse me, Mark from the FCN coming and speaking a little bit around some of the other things that can get in the way of becoming resilient. So thinking about things like managing stress, making sure you've got an emergency plan in place, and just making sure that you're not just I suppose physically, but also mentally and kind of resilient enough to be able to make some decisions, make changes that you need to make. So we're focusing on two aspects really, both the technical side of how do you become a resilient business, but also what are some of the other things that you need to think about in terms of the skills, the support that you might need to make sure that you can make the decisions and make the changes that you need. In support of those two interventions, and also in support of our pilot project, we've also developed an online training portal, online support portal. The reason we've gone down an online portal route is because of the current restrictions around things like COVID and the ability to bring people together into workshops is a little bit constrained at the minute, but also because we wanted to have some skills support around those things which are most common issues that get in the way of farm business becoming resilient. So this is a portal which is available to anybody who's been involved in any of our interventions. They can access it whenever they want, and it provides some little toolbox support packages around things like budgeting, accounting, bookkeeping, managing stress, how you can use things like environmental features to support improved profitability and improved resilience. And those will be both digital content, signposting content, support access for people like the NFU, CLA, Tenant Farmers Association, where they've got other support that might be valuable to you if you're a member. And the idea is that that's something you can come back to, and when you've got the question in the back of your mind is how do I go about creating a will, or how do I approach putting in place a succession plan or an emergency plan if something goes wrong. The idea is that these little toolboxes to help you answer some of those initial questions of how do I get started and where can I get extra support from. And then the final thing, which is relevant to those who were involved in our previous project, is we have got follow-up support available. So one of the things that came out of our first project was very much that going through the process of creating a resilience plan is really valuable, but it's also quite thought-provoking, and actually you need a bit of time to reflect, and sometimes you need a bit of extra help to understand what the next steps are. So for those people who've been involved in our pilot project, we're also offering support with an advisor, either from the Anderson Centre, from Fraser or Sarah or Mary, or from the Farm Community Network, to just come and talk through the next steps. How can you start to enact your plan? Can you refresh and review what you were thinking 6 months ago, and then come back to it and think about the changes that you might need to make in order to really drive forward the resilience of your business. So that's all, again, a whistle-stop tour of our offering. We have got some webinars coming up. So the first 2 weeks of November, we've got six of those resilience webinars coming up. Booking details will be out tomorrow, but please do go and have a look at our website. So if you're interested in booking into a one-to-one resilience review, if you have a look on the website, again, the link's there today, or alternatively phone up our dedicated helpline. So the number and the email address are there as well. And our help desk team can support you in booking in for any of the interventions. But Steve will again send out a flyer for the webinars if that's okay.
That's great. Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you for giving me the chance to come and give you a bit of an overview about our project. As with the previous two, SAC ran one of the pilot projects for the Future Farm Resilience last year. We've focused very much on one specific area in the Lake District as an area that was possibly going to struggle with the subsidies dropping, and the offering last year followed similar themes to what you've already heard. It was sort of business review, but we also offered a carbon audit as part of our business review, and what I found during the pilot was that the level of interest in the business review was quite limited. A lot of people were quite keen to learn more about the carbon side. So for our offering in this new round of funding, we have focused a lot more on the carbon side of things and termed the project Carbon for Farming. So we want to try and get people thinking about how carbon can support farming going through. Next slide, please. So, as I say, overall, carbon seemed to be quite a popular subject to talk about, and I think it's clear through some of the presentations earlier on that carbon's playing quite a big role in people's thinking and potentially in future income generation. So it's right that we try and bring it to the top of the agenda as we move through the transition. What I've also learned is we need to start looking at things, I suppose, in two different ways at farm level. But what I've seen in the past 18 months is carbon auditing is already going on at farm level, but I've seen it as quite a top-down approach. Farmers, primarily where I've been working, the dairy guys have been told by their supply chain, we want you to do a carbon audit, and they've dutifully done one. But it has been that top-down, you will do a carbon audit for us, and there seems to have been a bit of a lack of explaining what it all means and how the business can actually use that for its own benefit. It's just maybe been ticking a box for the supply chain. So what I was wanting to do through this project was just get a more a baseline understanding of how carbon is working within a farming system and how it can be used going forwards. Not necessarily answer every single question that everybody has about carbon, but start to get everybody up to the same level of understanding of what it all means. And say there's possibly two tiers to this. Net zero has been mentioned, and for a business to hit net zero, that is going to take quite a long time. We're not talking about everybody hitting net zero in the next 5 years. I know some of the supply chains have brought these deadlines forward a bit. NFU had the net zero deadline of 2040, and quite a few of the supermarkets are sort of creeping that closer to 2030. But that is going to involve a real amount of effort. And as I said on the bottom of the slide there, we shouldn't just be thinking about net zero. Farms should be thinking about net negative, actually sequestering more carbon than they're emitting, because that opens up the potential of these carbon markets. And I think the carbon market side is one of the areas that's a little bit like cowboy country at the minute. There's lots of misinformation, and I think people possibly being approached, because this is the big thing. Net zero isn't just for agriculture, obviously, it's for the whole of the country. And there's industry who will be looking at farmland and the countryside as a way of them offsetting their own carbon footprint. So we have had farmers being approached to sell their carbon, excuse me, and I see that as extremely dangerous just at the minute. If a farm doesn't know their baseline carbon position, how can they go and sell their carbon, particularly with from the point of view that the farm itself will have to hit net zero by 2040 as things stand. And if they've signed a long-term contract that sells their carbon for the next 50 years, that carbon is no longer theirs. And therefore, when they are trying to hit net zero, they will have to look at other ways of mitigating. So I think it's really important that in the long term, farmers start to look at their carbon footprint now, so that they can start to see how they can build towards net negative, and potentially give them that ability to sell carbon in the future. How it can be useful in the short term, though, carbon and profitability often tend to go hand in hand. And if we're looking at reducing subsidy payments, we're going to have to start looking at the margins on enterprises with a bit more, a bit of a finer pencil. And if that's the case, if carbon and profitability go hand in hand, then we can look at a carbon audit and say, right, well, this aspect of the business, the carbon footprint isn't particularly good. And if we cross-reference that with some margins, we might see that there's improvements that can be made there. So a farmer can look to do a baseline carbon audit now and hopefully make some business improvements in the next few years, but also that long-term plan of hitting net zero. Next slide, please. So I've run a few introductory webinars thus far, which half the time was spent talking about the transition, which was covered in the DEF presentation earlier, and the other half has been talking about how carbon fits into the picture. And I've got a couple more webinars coming up this week and next week, which I'll send the links to Steve to circulate, if you would please. It's definitely going to be into November now. There's going to be 5 specialist meetings where we were purely focusing on one area of the industry, and there's some example subject headings there. They're not fully set in stone yet, but I think the carbon markets meeting might be extremely interesting just to see how it all pans out in the future. But the aim of that is, if you're an arable business, you don't want to spend an hour talking about livestock and grassland necessarily. So we'll run those specialist carbon meetings so you can hopefully drill down a bit more into how carbon affects your sector in more detail. So those dates will be up in the next week or so. Next slide, please. So what we have as the main part of the project is a budget to run 200 baseline carbon audits. These will be delivered remotely. We've learned through COVID that you can work quite efficiently remotely. So we'll send out a data collection form. A consultant will ring the farmer just to sort of ensure all the bits of info are there. We'll then take that back and run the report through Agri-Tech, which is one of the 3 main carbon tools being used by the industry at the minute. And we will produce a baseline report, a very simple report. The whole point of this is to keep it simple and help understand what it all means. What are the gases that make up a carbon footprint? Where do they fit into the business? You know, this simplistic baseline carbon audit is the first step on the process. It's not going to answer every single question. It's not going to be a 10-year mitigation plan. As I say, it's just the first step to help understanding where it all fits into a farming business. Next slide, please. We know that there are some farms who have done this work already, that will have quite a few years worth of carbon audits under the belt, so they'll have some of those themes and trends already mapped out. So we do have a budget for 30 what we've called carbon management plan visits. So these will be face-to-face, and the aim of this will be to sort of look at what would be a 10-year plan from a mitigation point of view. So what sort of actions should we be looking at now to start implementing in the next few years to help that move towards net zero? So that, as I say, is for people who have already got that baseline. They do understand what's going on in the business, but want a little bit more help to plan out what's going to happen in the next 10 years. And they will be face-to-face, because I think it's going to be important for whoever does the carbon management plan that they can see what sort of land is there, what sort of resources are available, to then tailor that plan to make it effective and manageable. Next slide, please. So that's essentially our offering under this. The introductory meetings covers a little bit of the transition, but then it's very much moving into where carbon fits into the picture. There is an email address if you want to contact us for more information, and a phone number there. And as I say, I'll send the links to Steve for the meetings that I've got coming up in the next few weeks. And that's us.
For me for introducing it all on my behalf. I feel my role now is purely to summarise. So in quite swift ado, could I have the next slide, please, just to vaguely introduce Promar International. We are based nationally. We do focus on mainly dairy farms, but we help managers of farming businesses to unlock their potential to meet the challenges of running a successful and progressive business going forwards. So I think the important thing really to summarise in terms of the DEFRA Farm Resilience Programme is, if you could just click on this slide, please, that we know now that BPS in its current form will cease entirely, but the UK does have a climate change commitment, and Brexit and trade agreements are massively affecting market volatility. So to put it into context for those on the call, if you have a 100-cow dairy farm, the BPS payment is somewhere between 18 and 25,000. So for a 100-cow dairy farm averaging about 8,000 litres a cow, this will equate to about 3p a litre. Or if you have a sheep farm, it's maybe 400 lambs at £60 a head. So I'll leave you to work out the maths. If I could have the next slide, please. What exactly is resilience? Like, where are we headed with this? So really, resilience is about being robust and adaptable. So robustness means being able to maintain your ideal level of production in the face of disruption. Being robust is a great way to tackle long-term stresses, and similar to what David was saying, and small disruptions that hamper your business. To be more robust is to keep a close eye on the efficiency of your business. And that may quite clearly relate to what Neil refers to regarding carbon and the carbon work. Looking after your resources, these are your system reserves that give you a buffer against the challenges to your farm. Adaptability actually means being able to respond to challenges with new approaches, innovations, and possibly diversifying. Being adaptable means being ready for big shocks and disruptions. And you can't plan for every single little thing, but you can plan for uncertainty more generally by identifying potential new innovations and approaches that you can adopt on your farm. Seeking out learning opportunities and planning ahead for opportunities to change. So this actually means that I believe the task that DEFRA set us with resiliency ahead of us regarding all sorts of challenges ahead is not just about assessing the financial risk with the removal of BPS, or even the financial gain with those around the grants that may be in place or the likes, but our interpretation is to address resilience with each farm we visit during this project. And this is in terms of leadership and self-resilience. Are you able to take time off away from the farm? Do you delegate any work or share the burden of decision making? Have you introduced any new approaches to your farm? How self-resilient do you feel? We do end all reports with a link to FCN as well, and to look at actual mental health going forward in this area. In terms of finance resilience, are you in a regular habit of checking finances or even budgeting and understanding business performance compared to others? In the community, do you keep in touch with other farmers and keep up with latest trend and research? And are you helping develop your staff and their skills? With livestock and farm assets, are you making the most of your animals and land? And that delves into welfare and animal health and the likes, floated by Sam regarding livestock health planning. We've got climate change. So again, regarding what Neil kind of raised was, how prepared are you for more future and extreme weather events like flooding or long periods of drought? We're definitely seeing a shift change in terms of silage making this year. And in the marketplace, are you keeping track of market prices and thinking about the different ways and places that you can sell products? Could I have the next slide, please? And what this generates is a resilience score. So this is an example of a farm recently assessed in terms of the DEFRA Farm Resilience Programme. And we are seeing ranges in resilience score from around 40% to close to 90%. And you can see where the strengths really can be celebrated. And I think that's massively important at the very start of this, is once we understand where the strengths of the farm are, let's get behind it and really celebrate it. But then there's also some areas where some action can be taken in terms of resilience going forwards into the future. In this instance, cash flow was a real challenge. Succession is a concern, and the market for TB restricted calves is also a real worry. So the visiting consultant identified some really tangible action points that can be put in place today to begin to improve strength in these areas. This may involve, in some cases, a sustainable farming incentive calculation to see if there are some grant funds available to replace BPS, but sometimes it doesn't normally return any more than 50%. Please, can I have the next slide? So how are Promar doing it? Well, in terms of the allocation regarding the DEFRA Farm Resilience Fund, there are some businesses that are only delivering certain sectors, and that's something to be aware of when going to the sector to apply for involvement in the DEFRA Farm Resilience Fund. And we deliver in England to dairy, beef and sheep farms. We're on farm for around 3 hours, and we get really under the skin of that farming business itself with some initial questions to deliver that bespoke score. And then a really great discussion around action points. And doing it myself, I found that's really come alive. A light report. Nobody wants to read pages and pages of detail, and I think, Neil, you might have referred to that, but we absolutely promised to do a follow-up call, like guys have referred to before, in around 6 weeks to 2 months, to say those actions have been put in place. How are you getting on with them? Do you need any more explanation? So if I could have the next slide, please. We really, really want to ensure that no farmer is unaware of this project. I think that would be massively remiss, but we've got a really short deadline to hit. We've got to get this done by the 31st of January, really. So please begin the conversation with your contacts. Please point them in our direction or even the direction of anybody else on the list, but be aware that it is sector specific in some situations. If I could have the next slide, please. You can use the register here form on our website. if you just click on the Future Farming Resilience Fund at promarinternational.com, you're more than welcome to register any interest. You do need an SBI number, and it's really important to note that there isn't any double funding permitted. So for example, if somebody you know uses ADAS, then they're using ADAS, and that's who they use. If they use Promar, or if they use SAC, or if they use Ricardo, then it's just that specific delivery for this project itself. So thank you ever so much. If we could just finish on the next slide. That's my contact details if anybody ever wants to get hold of me. Thank you for your time.